Welcome back to The Basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we wind up our look at the second quarter of 1969, the months of April, May, and June. We'll talk about movies and Beach Boy events in the second quarter, including a look at their new single, Breakaway. Let's get started with movies. As usual, movie releases were more interesting in the second quarter of the year than they had been in the first quarter. Among major new releases were Goodbye Columbus, a comedy-drama romance starring Richard Benjamin, Ali MacGraw, and Jack Klugman, released on April 3rd. It'll turn out to be one of the highest-grossing films of the year and number one at the box office for 2 weeks in mid-August and for the first week of September. Released on May 1st was The Mad Room, a horror thriller starring Stella Stevens and Shelley Winters. It'll be number one the week of May 14th. And released on May 14th was Krakatoa, East of Java, an adventure epic in Cinerama set around the massive 1883 eruption of the Krakatoa volcano. In actual fact, Krakatoa is west, not east of Java. Depending on the source, the filmmakers either discovered the error during production but decided to keep the title East of Java because it sounded more exotic, or discovered it after promotional materials had been made so they deemed it too expensive to make a correction. In any case, it'll be successful, eventually reaching number one at the box office on December 3rd, 27 weeks after its release. On May 22nd came Winning, starring Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward, and Robert Wagner. Newman plays a driver at the Indianapolis 500. Training for the role with actual drivers sparked Newman's interest in the sport, and he'll actually become a driver himself, participating in races for most of the rest of his life. It'll be number one the week of its release, May 28th. And on May 25th came Midnight Cowboy, probably the most critically acclaimed movie of the year despite its X rating. It starred newcomer Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman of The Graduate. It'll be a box office hit, the seventh highest grossing film of the year, and number one at the box office the week of August 6th. At the Academy Awards ceremony on April 7, 1970, it'll become the first and to date only X-rated film to win Best Picture. It'll also win a Best Director Oscar for John Schlesinger. As standards have changed, Midnight Cowboy's rating has since been amended to an R. I've always wondered how much of the sleazy reputation New York acquired in the 70s was initially shaped by the way it's portrayed in Midnight Cowboy. Am I onto something there? Released on May 28th was The April Fools, a romantic comedy starring Jack Lemmon and Catherine Deneuve, which will be number one at the box office the week of July 23rd. The 1962 World War II drama The Longest Day was re-released on June 6th to tie in with the 25th anniversary of D-Day. The re-release will prove highly successful, and the film will be number one the week of June 11th. On June 11th came True Grit, an offbeat Western starring John Wayne, Kim Darby, and Glenn Campbell in his first major film role. It'll be a major box office hit and number one the weeks of August 27th and September 17th. For his portrayal of bounty hunting Marshal Rooster Cogburn, John Wayne will earn his first and only Oscar for Best Actor of 1969. A week later, on June 18th, came the release of a very different kind of Western, Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. Instantly notable and infamous for its graphic depiction of violence, it nevertheless receives mostly positive reviews and will be a box office success. And turning to Beach Boys events in the spring, kicking off the quarter on April 1st, the Beach Boys recorded an appearance for the afternoon talk program, The Mike Douglas Show. They performed live vocals over a pre-recorded backing for their new single, I Can Hear Music, and Dennis's Never Learn Not to Love. When Dennis comes forward to do his lead vocal on the second song, Carl moves to drums. Their appearance is broadcast on April 9th. 2 days after the taping, on April 3rd, the band leave for an 11-day tour of the Southeast. During this tour and later in the year, the Beach Boys also perform at a number of children's hospitals as part of Carl's alternative service as a conscientious objector to military service. On April 12th, the Beach Boys file suit against Capitol Records for just over $2 million in unpaid royalties and production fees and losses incurred through general mismanagement. Having effectively severed their relationship with Capitol, the Beach Boys announce a major relaunch of Brother Records with the hope to create the furthest-reaching music company ever established. The announcement certainly sounds reminiscent of the Beatles' launch of Apple the prior summer. Surprisingly, within a few days behind the scenes, Capitol and Beach Boys management are discussing the idea of keeping the group on the label. As discussed earlier, on April 26th, the I Can Hear Music single peaks at number 24. 3 days later, on May 30th, the Beach Boys open a new European tour at the Brighton Dome in Brighton, England. The tour will continue with more stops in the UK, plus Holland, Belgium, West Germany, France, and notably Czechoslovakia, which, only months before in August 1968, had been invaded by the Soviets and other Warsaw Pact troops to put an end to anti-communist reforms in the country. The Beach Boys are one of the first Western groups to tour the country since the invasion and are welcomed with huge and enthusiastic audiences. The experience is a welcome boost for the Czechoslovakian audiences and for the Beach Boys themselves. The tour will end on June 22nd. On June 16th, while the Beach Boys' European tour is in France, the Breakaway Celebrate the News single is released. After 2020, the Beach Boys owed Capitol one more single. They didn't waste it by giving their old label inferior material. The A-side is a collaboration between Brian and Murray Wilson. Brian says the title came from Murray. He'd been watching the Joey Bishop show when the phrase, "We're going to break away for a minute and we'll be right back," caught his ear. The Joey Bishop show was ABC's late-night talk show, which was its answer to the highly successful Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, which aired at the same time over on NBC. Actually, it was less an answer than it was a complete copy. I've also read that Brian was quoted as saying that the song was inspired by the Monkees. I wasn't able to find the original quote or any indication of how they might have inspired it. Undoubtedly, the idea of breaking away would have been appealing to the Monkees in 1969. Their NBC TV show had gone off the air in August 1968, and their movie had tanked in the fall. On April 14th, their last appearance as a foursome was aired on the NBC special 33 1/3 Revolutions per Monkey. By the time of the airing, Peter Tork had already left the group, spending a small fortune to buy out the rest of his contract. He had a new band, which he had named Release, in celebration of his emancipation from the Monkees. It'll end up being ironic, since one thing Release never does is release anything. With interest in the group having nosedived after the end of their series, NBC put 33 1/3 Revolutions per Monkey on as cannon fodder opposite the 41st Academy Awards ceremony on ABC. Even Michael Nesmith admitted that, having already seen the special, he watched the Academy Awards like pretty much everybody else. The more fiscally responsible Monkees will soldier along as a trio, serving out the remainder of their contracts. They'll play some concerts in smaller venues, do TV commercials, and make some guest appearances on TV shows including Laugh-In, The Johnny Cash Show, and The Glenn Campbell Good Time Hour. Actually, by the time their television special aired, the Monkees had already released their first three-man album, Instant Replay, on February 15th, 1969. It'll manage to go to number 32 on the chart. They'll release one more as a trio and one as a duo, which will go to number 100 and number 152 respectively, before finally calling it quits in 1970. If anybody's familiar with that Brian Wilson quote about the Monkees and Breakaway, or has any idea how the Monkees might have inspired that song, please let me know. Actually, I'd be surprised if the Breakaway single didn't owe something to the ad campaign that was running early in the year for the 1969 Pontiacs. The ad campaign was called Breakaway, and the TV commercials featured a jingle with the refrain, "Breakaway to the wide track in Pontiac, 'cause the wide track in Pontiac is the breakaway car this year." It was a big national campaign, so I'd be surprised if Murray and Brian weren't familiar with it. The Beach Boys song has enough of a passing similarity to the jingle that I have to believe a lot of people in 1969 made the connection when they first heard it. You can find the Pontiac jingle here on YouTube. I've posted a link in the description so you can check it out. The song's title may have come easily, but the song may not have. In some interviews, Brian recalled that the two of them plunked and plunked and plunked away on the piano until they finally got a song going. As with so many of Brian's recollections, though, there are contradictions. In Wouldn't It Be Nice, he says writing it took less than an hour. In I Am Brian Wilson, he says they knocked it out in half an hour. In any case, it sounds as if Murray was the main driver on the song. Bruce says that it was Murray who forced the song to be a good track. Of course, publishing money would have been a consideration. You can never tell about these things, but I get the idea that Murray might have been motivated by a sincere desire to get Brian engaged in making music again. Of course, on the label, Murray is credited as Reggie Dunbar, apparently at his request. His reasons are unclear, but I imagine in 1969, even Murray Wilson knew that it wouldn't be cool to be writing rock songs with your dad, especially for a group already struggling to be accepted as hip. If Murray was trying to motivate Brian, it seems to have worked. Brian appears to have been enthusiastic and had high hopes for Breakaway as a single. It's a big production harkening back to Brian's mid-60s work, but with a modern, mature sound. The drumming and the break, wake, shake away group vocals provide the song with a strong, catchy opening. Carl's singing on the verses lifts the song, and Al picks up the lead on the choruses so seamlessly that you hardly notice the lead singer has changed. The lyrics are great and relatable to a lot of situations. The "make a way for each happy day as my life turns around" section almost feels like a Doppler effect as we move into the ending section with the castanets and the mic bass vocal and the group singing "Feel the Vibrations" and all the sensations. Al Jardine said, "We knew we had 90% of a great record, but typical of his late 60s mentality, Brian underproduced and undersold the ending of the record." I hadn't really noticed that before, but listening to the song with that in mind, it does seem like it could have benefited from ending with the same kind of drive that it started with. Bruce noted the record as "when Brian stopped singing high." He had been singing lower and lower. The way it's voiced, it sounds like a bunch of old men. It doesn't sound like the Beach Boys. I've always liked the B-side, Dennis's "Celebrate the News," his first released co-write with his friend Greg Jacobson. It has a weird asymmetrical structure which holds interest and gives it charm. I like Dennis's low-key hello that opens it and the vocal arrangement, though I can understand that the extremely high "no mores" might get on some people's nerves. Again, it has an excellent and relatable lyric. Like the A-side, it's a song about something better beginning. Brian called it a song about being optimistic because things were looking up after a long time down, a sentiment that certainly would have appealed to the Beach Boys in 1969. It moves through several disparate but equally enjoyable sections, building effectively to a powerful ending. I'd say this was Dennis's best work to date, though he would soon surpass it. As you might guess, with the Beach Boys leaving the label, Capitol wasn't interested in devoting a lot of time and money to promoting the single. On August 5th, Breakaway peaks at a dismal 63 on the US singles chart. That's 2 slots lower than the disappointing Bluebirds Over the Mountain single at the beginning of the year, and their worst charting original A-side since their first, Surfin', was a regional hit back in 1962. As was becoming the usual situation, the single does much better in the rest of the world, going to number 10 in Holland and number 6 in the UK. Brian said of Breakaway, "That's a beautiful song. I think it might be one of my most underrated songs." David Leaf called it easily the greatest Beach Boys 45 that wasn't a hit. When we talked about 2020, I posed the question whether "Do It Again" had been the Beach Boys' best single between Heroes and Villains and Sail On Sailor. Breakaway would obviously be a strong contender. The A-sides are different enough that it's pretty hard to compare them. Do It Again's B-side, of course, was Wake the World, which had already been released on Friends. With Breakaway having a strong original B-side and Celebrate the News, I think I'd say that Breakaway is the best single during those years, with Do It Again arguably the best A-side. And that's where we'll leave 1969 for now. Hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll join us next time for the beginning of a very eventful and very memorable summer of 1969. Meanwhile, I look forward to your comments, perspective, and feedback. As always, please hit like if you don't mind, subscribe if you haven't. Have a great week. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.